There is an ancient proverb that says, "All roads lead to Rome." In the 2nd century AD, that statement was entirely true. The Roman Empire was not merely a nation, it was an entire world. From the sun-scorched deserts of North Africa to the misty forests of Britain, from the shores of the Atlantic Ocean to the banks of the Euphrates River in the Middle East, everything lay beneath the marching boots of the Roman legions. But imagine a giant so enormous that it can no longer hear the beating of its own heart. When an emperor in Rome issued a decree, it could take 3 months for the order to reach the frontier. And when enemies poured across the borders, reinforcements sometimes arrived only after the city had already turned to ashes. In 395 AD, the blade of history finally fell. One of the greatest empires humanity had ever known was officially split in two. This was not merely a line drawn on a map. It was the beginning of two completely different destinies. One would collapse into ruin, while the other would shine for another 1,000 years. Why did they have to part ways? And who would ultimately emerge victorious? Join us as we travel back through time to witness the most painful divorce in human history. To understand why Rome had to split in two, we must look back to the 3rd century, a period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. At that time, Rome was like a magnificent mansion whose foundations had already begun to rot. First came the disease of politics. In just 50 years, as many as 26 emperors claimed the throne. Only one died of old age. The rest were assassinated or killed in battle. The army, rather than defending the borders, was busy electing new emperors in exchange for generous rewards. Second came the slow death of the economy. To finance endless civil wars, emperors made a disastrous decision. They reduced the silver content of the denarius coin. The result was runaway inflation. The Roman currency, once a symbol of stability, had become little more than worthless pieces of metal. People began returning to the primitive practice of bartering goods. And finally, the monsters beyond the borders sensed weakness. Germanic tribes from the north and the Sassanid Empire from the east began tearing at the empire's frontiers. Rome now resembled a bleeding giant, its limbs no longer obeying the brain in Rome. In 284 AD, a man named Diocletian came to power. He was neither a romantic dreamer nor merely a warrior. He was a coldly pragmatic administrator. Looking at the map, Diocletian realized a simple truth: no single man could rule the entire world. He introduced an unprecedented solution, dividing the empire into east and west. Each half would be ruled by an emperor called an Augustus, assisted by a junior emperor known as a Caesar. This system became known as the Tetrarchy. But pay close attention to Diocletian's choice. He chose to rule the eastern half, with his capital at Nicomedia, a wealthy, vibrant region rich in resources. Rome? He left the western half to his colleague Maximian. This was the moment when the center of power began to shift. Rome, the eternal city, felt abandoned for the first time. Diocletian managed to save the empire from immediate collapse, but he also unintentionally planted the seeds of an irreparable division. When he eventually retired to his homeland, to grow cabbages, his system collapsed into civil wars. Yet the idea of two halves of Rome had already taken root. After the chaos of the Tetrarchy, an extraordinary figure emerged: Constantine the Great. He did not merely reunite the empire under one sword. He made two decisions that would change the world forever. First, he embraced Christianity, transforming a once persecuted religion into an imperial faith. Second, and most important for our story, he built a new capital. In 330 AD, upon the foundations of the ancient town of Byzantium, a magnificent city arose: Constantinople, often called the Second Rome. Why Constantinople? Look at the map. It occupies a unique position connecting Europe and Asia, controlling trade routes from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Its massive walls were so formidable that even the most powerful weapons of the time struggled to breach them. Constantinople was rich, youthful, and full of life. Meanwhile, old Rome was growing poor, aging, and increasingly vulnerable. The heart of the empire now beat in the east. Some say that when Constantine left Rome, he carried with him everything that once made Rome great to his new capital. The unity under Constantine was only temporary. In 395 AD, Emperor Theodosius I died. In his final will, he made a decision that history would later call the final blade. He divided the empire between his two sons. Arcadius, the elder, inherited the wealthy eastern half. Honorius, a 10-year-old child, inherited the exhausted and crumbling west. From that moment on, the Eastern and Western Roman empires would never truly be one again. They had two emperors, two governments, two armies, and at times, they even treated each other as rivals. The West entered its darkest days. Barbarian tribes, such as the Visigoths and Vandals, poured across the borders like an unstoppable flood. In 410 AD, for the first time in 800 years, Rome was captured and sacked. Smoke filled the sky. Golden statues were melted down. Libraries burned to ashes. Meanwhile, in the east, in Constantinople, people continued drinking wine from silver cups and discussing philosophy. They looked toward the west with pity, but offered no real help. They believed themselves to be the true Romans, leaving their brother in the west to sink alone into the mud of history. In 476 AD, a Germanic general named Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Ironically, the boy carried the names of both the legendary founder of Rome and its first emperor. The Western Roman Empire officially disappeared, giving way to the early kingdoms that would later become France, Germany, and England. But in the East, the Byzantine Empire continued to flourish for nearly another 1,000 years, preserving law, science, and knowledge until its fall to the Ottomans in 1453. The division of Rome teaches us a bitter lesson. No organization, no matter how great, can survive forever if it fails to resolve its internal conflicts and growing inequalities. The fall of Rome was not an end. It was a transformation. From the ashes of that division, the modern world as we know it began to emerge. Thank you for joining us on this journey through 2,000 years of history. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like and subscribe to support us in telling more epic stories of the past. And for now, goodbye, and see you in the next story.